Good morning and good evening, afternoon, wherever you are, as you listen to this recording, or for those who are present here as well. My name is Amrita. I've spoken to some of you, exchanged some emails, got to know some just this morning. But so happy that you chose to be here and be here on time. We're hosting, you know, my dear friend, I like to call him, as well as my spiritual partner, as I've got to know him, uh, to bring Leon VanderPol here with us in presence. Uh, and it really doesn't make a difference if it's virtual or if it's in person, but to experience his presence here today is something that I really see as a gift that I received. And I look to share that with the rest of my world as it grows and expands. So, a little bit about I run a firm called the Back to Source Coaching. And as part of some of the work that we do here is that we bring in masters that we resonate with, have experienced their work and has impacted us. We'd like to bring that out to the rest of the world. And Leon is, is that special person in my life. Leon is from the Center for Transformational Coaching. I met him 5 years ago now, and it I think it just seemed most appropriate, well timed, and really an experience of great trust in what was pre-planned, as I like to look at it, for us to meet and collaborate to bring what we bring every year to the Indian cohort called Deep Coaching Intensive, one amongst the many programs that Leon and the center offer the world. So I'm going to invite Leon to really just share a little bit about himself and what brings him to this work. I've shared a lot of material with most of you, so I'm sure you're well versed and have read his book or at least heard him or seen him, but I'll just invite Leon to share a little bit about himself. And then I'll give some little bit of housekeeping for today's session, and then we'll jump in to this, what we're calling the open house with Leon.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, there's much to say in terms of my general background. So I'll start with kind of the surface. I am Canadian by birth. I reside currently in Canada, but I've just returned here a few months ago after living abroad in both Thailand and Taiwan for 30 years. So I'm in the midst of a kind of readaptation to my native culture, but this time I have with me my wife, who's Taiwanese, and my two teenage kids as well. So we're settling into Canada life. That's a bit of a shift, I tell you, from the Asian world. The beauty for me of living in Asia all these years is that it kind of afforded me an opportunity to fully explore my calling in this world. You know, I write in the book, and some of you have read it, but I write about this thing called a journey of transformation. And a big piece of that came from my own journey. So maybe I could say when I was even in my 20s, I was already called to understanding what this thing called life purpose is. I was called to explore spirituality. I was called to kind of follow my own inner drummer on a bit of a life adventure that took me to many corners of the world and to many kinds of relationships and experiences. And all of that just kept kind of pointing to something within me that wanted to be birthed. And there was a lot of frustration, a lot of angst, a lot of uncertainty and doubt on that path, a lot of false starts, a lot of great hopes that were dashed. And it was only in hindsight that I can look back and say, actually, this is really quite the normal for those who really do embark on a journey to know themselves at a very essential level, to heal themselves at a core level, and then to really live into the fullest expression of their highest potential. That it is not a road that is just paved with roses, that it is a road that is often bumpy and challenging. And so having walked that and finally kind of coming into what I felt was my work. Now, the vehicle happened to be something that we call coaching. And that I didn't see coming early on. In fact, coaching didn't even come to Asia until I'd say the early 2000s, maybe 20 years ago, kind of hit the shore. And it was a big unknown. I was spending a lot of time in the corporate world doing training and facilitation, but this thing called coaching I'd never heard of until someone kind of pointed the way and said, "Hey, check that out, Leon, check that out. That might be worth your time." I thought, sure, I'll have a look. Well, lo and behold, it kind of took me by surprise and gripped me and showed me a way of engaging with people that went deeper and became more authentic, more real than anything that I'd ever experienced before. And I fell in love with coaching. And somehow it became the vehicle for the delivery of this work, which we call deep coaching, which I call deep coaching or deep transformational coaching, which is really, I guess, at essence, the idea is to position coaching as a healing modality. Because when we start to recognize what transformation is as a kind of core journey of self-actualization, it's the recognition that it is kind of an altogether reconfiguring of our sense of self, our learned sense of self, our conditioned sense of self. And that all of that can be kind of come up for questioning and examination if we really allow it to kind of happen within us. So that journey itself is really the essence of transformational coaching, a healing journey, a journey into knowing ourselves as whole as and complete, a journey of knowing ourselves at an essential level, and then beginning to be able to express that into the world through our work, through our passions, through our talents, no longer driven as much by, say, the ego and its needs and wants, but so much more by the heart and how it wants to shape the world and the soul and how it wants to feed the world. So deep coaching is the vehicle. And so when I have this course, and I say to people, we are doing coaching work. So the methodology lands in the coaching sphere. It doesn't land in the healing sphere alone. It is this idea that we're positioning coaching. And I think that's what makes it actually kind of unique in the coaching world, is that we're positioning coaching as a healing modality. And we're positioning coaching as a spirit-based modality. We're not shying away from naming spirit or spirituality. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're this highly spiritual person, but we're not shying away from opening to it as a potential and perhaps even as an actual within our life experience. Okay. So that's a bit about, kind of me. I mean, there's a lot of detail on how I got there, which I was just not going to go into, but, eventually this led me to opening the center. And then we've been here now 10 years delivering this work around the world. Some of you, as Crystal mentioned, have the book. Some are already joining the course. And what I would like to do most tonight, for you today, is to just answer any questions you may have, fill in any gaps. If you would like to know more about me personally or my experience too with this work, with how it was created, I'm open to those questions. In other words, nothing is really off the table here. So if that's okay with you, Amrita, just kind of opening it up, right, to what maybe people would like to talk about with me. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And very happy to open it up. We're a small group, but I also want to, presence that there were a number of questions that did come in, and I also had a few requests saying that given the time of the day, they were heading to work, so they may not be able to attend the session, but they would like a few of the questions answered. And so I have some of those questions, and I will go ahead and ask them maybe, or join the bandwagon of us here present this morning who wish to ask those questions. But I'll speak on behalf of the questions that came in. And let's just see how it goes. As Leon is sharing in response to some of the questions that I asked, if there's a question that comes up for you, then feel free to either put it into the chat box or just, maybe raise your electronic hand and ask it straight away, so that we have multiple voices, as we listen in to ourselves, to Leon, and to each other. So I'll just begin. And, Leon, you already began speaking about it, quite naturally. But one of the things that gives me great joy in bringing this work is the ability to say that what we offer is a spirit-based coach training program, but more an excuse, like I like to call it, for personal mastery. And so I want to just, begin by asking a question that came in that says, does someone have to be spiritual to experience this work? And I've shared my little response back to them, but I'll wait for you to share, Leon, a little bit. And what is your experience with spirituality?
Yeah, so as I think on that, as I've spoken to you about too, the assumption that we work on is that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. So in that sense, as long as we're having a human experience, in some sense, we're having a spiritual experience. But it doesn't mean that everybody that comes to the work sees it that way. And I think that's what the question's kind of getting at is like, if I don't see the world through, say, a spiritual lens, can I still, benefit from this work or still gain from this work? Now, there's a couple of aspects to it that I'll answer. And the first is simply that this work is steeped in spirituality to the degree that it's steeped in how the mind operates. And that then takes us into the realm of psychology. So deep coaching is an ontological approach, means that we are really interested in this that we're calling a way of being, like our way of being in the world, the presence that we bring to life through us. So that's the ontological nature of our work. And then there's a psychological aspect to that, in that we start to recognize that when we work with how the mind constructs reality and how our minds make meaning of the world and how our mind creates our experience, now we're fully in the realm of psychology. And from my experience, anybody who is interested in doing transformational work, and that doesn't mean as a coach, it could be in any capacity that where you're working with people in a transformational way, those two pieces matter. The piece that we really are noticing and becoming aware of, maybe that's a better way to say it, becoming aware of our way of being in this world. That's really, really critical. And the other piece is that we are gaining an understanding of psychology, how the mind creates our experience in the world. And so in that way, anybody can enter into deep coaching. Anybody who has an interest in ontology, anybody who's got an interest in psychology, anybody who wants to learn how to be a better coach, because of the way that we start to look at these pieces of ourselves. And we're not opening it up to all theory of psychology or all theory of ontology. It's not this huge, massive theoretical piece, but it is trying to look at, in particular, a concept called our self-concept. So a self-concept is a psychological term that just refers to our learned, conditioned idea about who we are and our purpose and place in this world. And very often this is a kind of unconsciously constructed idea of who we are. And it's built often through both positive and negative experiences, both healthy and you may call unhealthy experiences from childhood onward. But for all the human beings that I've ever known, we develop kind of a shell of ego in that process. And that shell of ego begins to project itself into the world in so many ways. And so transformation is this idea that we can begin to transcend that, dissolve that shell of ego. But all of this stuff, I think people who have even no spiritual inclination can come into this work and really benefit from. So the spiritual piece then becomes like an overlay. People who go on a deep transformational journey, who are really interested in understanding the nature of themselves, eventually seem to land on this idea that there is more to them than just a material being. They start to experience shifts in their own state of consciousness, and they often become interested in exploring spirituality beyond maybe even, say, the religion that they have been raised in. That doesn't mean that they're forsaking that religion. And this work does not require anyone to do anything like that. But it does mean that they're starting to look a little bit more at the essence of perhaps what that religion is speaking to, the essence of life at a spiritual level. There's kind of a natural inclination towards that. So we'll notice too that what this work does, it kind of gives permission for people to really speak to that part of their growing self. And that's what I love about it. It's not just that we're imposing this idea that says, you need to think this way. It's a little bit more like, what if we just start to notice this greater context in which we all live each and every day, which we breathe, so to speak. And notice how that wants to kind of impact our life. Notice what's there for us in this way, what changes when we do. So it's an invitation for people to begin to explore that part of themselves a little bit more without, again, any imposition. Because if anything, the deep coach does not want to be imposing upon anyone a way to think, act, do regarding anything, let alone spirituality, so that each person can come into themselves in their own unique way. So that's why I say I don't think you need to be quote unquote spiritual to benefit from this work. And yet it seems to be that as people come into it, there's a natural inclination towards exploring that part of themselves in some way, perhaps more than they have ever done before.
Thanks, Stephen. My response is always that we are all spiritual. It's just that some are aware of it and some aren't. And so this gives you an opportunity to explore that aspect of yourself and the way that you see yourself through this work. And therefore, to every single person, hand on heart, that has ever spoken to me, I always say that do the course or join us if you want to embark on this journey for yourself. It becomes, supporting and helping others happens naturally as you work with yourself. And you hold that intention of supporting others, but the journey really begins with self. And that's really what's I think, the most significant part of for me to do this work. As I teach this work more, as I engage more and more in this space, as I coach more from this space, the person that I find I'm supporting the most is myself. And that's really why I love this work. And I keep speaking to everyone about it's about your presence and how your presence, keeps expanding as you work more and more with yourself. And a question that has come up and weave it into this context is that, does the course offer any skills and techniques, to build this presence, or how does that really happen through this program?
Sorry, can you rephrase that question?
Or
just repeat it again? Yeah.
So I'll say that, are there any skills? I'll actually say it exactly how I received it. What are some of the skills and techniques that are taught in this course?
Okay. Interesting. I always love that question because it points to a way of seeing coach training that isn't exactly the approach that we take at the center. So I don't know how many of you are trained coaches or how many of you have gone through any kind of a certification program, but very often what they are going to teach is a little more of what we call the transactional approach to coaching, because it's a foundation. Transactional coaching is a foundation. It's where you learn the skills and the techniques and perhaps the models and some methodologies to ensure that you can work with a person from A and take them all the way through to D kind of thing, right? It's a nice, if I have these skills, I have these techniques, and I have this framework, and I've kind of internalized it to some degree, I can coach anyone and move them through to some kind of an outcome that would be beneficial for them. And therefore, people, when they come to this work, often first ask, so what then, and naturally then, are the skills and techniques and maybe tools that you're going to give me to help me become a better coach? And it's a valid question, but it's also coming from a certain context, or let's call it a paradigm. And what happens when we shift the paradigms is that what's true in one paradigm is not necessarily true in another. What's true at one level may not be true at another level. And therefore, in the deep coaching work that we do, it's far less about imparting skills and techniques and methods and models and frameworks, that kind of thing. It's not to say that you won't pick some up as you go, because through the work, you're going to feel that you gain a greater skill set. But it's not as though it's just put in front of you, like, here are the skills, and we're going to go through these one at a time until you've nailed them. We work with, and if you've read the book again, you'll know this, we work with what are transformational practices or transformative practices. Now, the difference is that a practice is really something that's intended for you to be doing in a kind of daily way as a means for you to augment and advance your own transformation. And then as well, taking those same practices into other contexts, in this case, the coaching context or a session context, and then beginning to practice it there. And the practices are all designed with one kind of key purpose, and that is to create the optimal conditions in which transformation unfolds naturally and organically. Naturally and organically. So, what we're looking to do in this work is to understand the dynamics of a very natural organic process. What we're calling transformation is organic is when the caterpillar morphs into a butterfly. Like as organic as that process, we want to be able to facilitate that. And we want to do that, and again, in the spirit of natural and organic, ease and joy kind of thing, right? So the practices are all about creating the optimal conditions in which that natural, self-volitional process of change can happen of its own accord, without it needing to be forced or driven or made to happen. And this is a very, very different paradigm of coaching and working with people than the more transactional. Well, if I just ask these questions, or if I just take you through this 5-step process, we're going to have you land where you want to land. In this work, it's suddenly saying, well, wait a minute. What if we think, again, this metaphor of the caterpillar, such a good one, right? What if we create a cocoon? And that cocoon is woven of all the optimal nutrients that would help whatever is inside that cocoon become that which it is trying to become. Okay. So in this case, these practices are kind of like those nutrients. They are the threads that weave, and they create a space, kind of held space, a healing space, in which this natural self-volitional process of transformation can unfold. In other words, we're trying to help people lean into their own process, a process, again, that's happening not because they're forcing themselves, not because they're waking up one day saying, you know, I'm going to transform. Today's the day. Let's make it happen now. It's just noticing that this is what's arising in me. This is what I want to say yes to. This is what I want to lean into. And if we can create the conditions. So the practices have two applications. They have a self-application, because what happens when you begin to practice these for yourself is that you're creating the conditions for your own transformation. And then again, what happens in the other context, which is the coaching context, is when you begin to practice them there. What happens then as you begin to weave that optimal condition, if you will, in which someone else's growth can unfold naturally and organically. So this is a very different approach, as I said, then to a more skills-based, tool-based approach to coaching. Now, I know what I've said there may not be really clear for all of you, because you may just be new to this work and not yet really grasping that. So if you have further questions on what that one, you know, just come in, because I'm always happy to say a bit more about how we work with practices versus tools.
Yeah, Raja.
I just want to check in the first place. Can one add to the answer, or should I hold it back till the end in terms of sharing observations?
Well, it depends what you're speaking to. Are you going to speak to the question of how this deep coaching work is different, kind of things?
The question of
I'm not sure.
to the spiritual, that question.
Oh yeah. Okay. Why don't you hold it to the end, though, just to make sure that the question that we're just asking now gets answered. And then, yeah, let's just see what comes forth from our more group conversation at the end. Perfect.
Done.
Yeah, because we can just open it up there for your own experiences too.
Yeah. Crystal's put in a question in the chat box, but I'll just invite you to bring your voice in and ask it yourself.
Thanks, Amrita. I was just saying that it would be lovely if you could expand a bit more on the practices that you utilize. Thank you.
You mean the specific practices themselves? Yeah, great. Okay. So there are, oh, look, I think I have a function here that allows me to do, hang on. Is this going to work? Oh, it's not working yet. There's supposed to be these new functions. I can't make it work. Anyway, sorry. I just saw something happening. Yeah, so we work with 9 transformative practices. And so again, the idea of a transformative practice is that it supports our transformation. So I'll give you an example of the first practice. Slow it all down and sync with the rhythm of life and spirit. So this is it's a foundational practice, but it's actually a really big practice. For a lot of people, this idea of slowing life down in order to really spend time more in reflection, more with themselves, that whole notion can be really, really challenging. In more transactional coaching conversations, one of the things is that there is this sense that we've got to get somewhere. We've got to get somewhere. We've got to get a result. We've got to get an outcome from this session today. And then what happens is the whole session is kind of striving, and the coach is kind of striving for that outcome. And that translates to life too, this idea that we need to be productive and make things happen and move things forward, that we become very, very busy. We become distracted easily. We take on tremendous amounts of things, and they can be pleasurable. It's not about them not being pleasurable, but we can often take on too much, and that can become stressful. So lives become this kind of hurried, rushing thing. And then recognizing that if we want to really grow at a core level of being, like if we want to transform our inner experience and our kind of greater, our greater experience of how we show up in life and how we experience life, we want to transform that. We want to transform ourselves from what feels perhaps a little bit more like the egoic mind that leads our life to maybe the more soulful mind that leads our life. Then it helps me to really start to notice, am I giving myself the time and space for that? Am I taking a step back? Am I taking breaths? Am I maybe saying no to some things and just allowing myself to sit, reflect, or read, or write, or whatever it is that I do that just brings me that sense of me being with me? So we notice that when people do that for themselves on this journey, there's such benefit. It's almost as though when people begin to transform, when they really say yes to this hero's journey of transformation, it's almost like there's no choice but to begin to take a step away. So we're taking that same idea and saying, well, what happens if in the coaching space, we create an environment in which we're not striving for anything, where we can drop all that pretense, where we can drop all this ideation that we have to get somewhere. What if we just drop all of that? What if we just become incredibly spacious and open with each other, and then notice what arises? Because something will assuredly begin to arise in that. And that often comes from kind of a deeper sense of self. So that's just one example. Like, what would it look like to slow your life down so that it's really deeply in sync with this natural flow of energy of life with a capital L, with spirit with a capital S? Like, what would that be like? Not just in our lives as we go about, but as we bring that to the people we work with, whether it's in a coaching session or whether it's in a meeting at work. What if we were just becoming this more spacious being that just allows more, accepts more, trusts more, invites more, witnesses more? It's like, I hear so many people say to me, Leon, that would be lovely. Oh, that'd be so lovely. I would love to. And here it comes. But if I do that, then this will break and this will fall apart and this will be lost. And this is what I fear. And that keeps them from entering into that rhythm of life that's truly optimal for their well-being, in which so much greater ease, so much greater joy, so much less stress. Like, okay, I'm not there yet. So that's just one example of the 9 practices. Like the second practice is about living your spiritual values. And again, this one is, what would it look like to move from paying them lip service, where we talk about our spiritual values or talk about our highest values, to becoming the living, breathing embodiment of that? So I say to someone, what's your spiritual value? They say peace. Okay, peace. Are you the living, breathing embodiment of peace in all waking, sleeping moments of your day? Nope. Oh, you're not there yet. Okay, well, welcome to the club of those of us who are not there yet. But what would it look like to be that? And if you were the living, breathing embodiment at a being level of peace, how would your life change? How would the relationships you have with people change? How would the sessions you're coaching change if you were simply that. If you were simply love, if you were simply honesty, if you're simply trust, whatever that is, if you could just embody that. So that's a second practice. But to get to that place where we're the living, breathing, walking, talking, living embodiment requires us to kind of go on a journey to really become that embodied person. And that's what makes it a practice. It's something that we choose day in, day out for an extended period of time so that it actually has the ability to kind of revolutionize our inner experience. So that's what we work with. We're working with these extraordinarily life-changing practices. Like we got 9 of them, but I always figure like even if you did one, like just do one completely, like just commit your life to that one and then notice how things change. I think it'd be remarkable. We got 9 of them. So we go through these in the course. We have 2 parts of the course. There's a foundation part and a mastery part. And so foundation, we introduce the whole curriculum. So we're kind of working with them, getting our feet wet, trying them on, so to speak. There are some foundational practices. And then as we move down into the deeper practices, some of them get a little bit more esoteric, a little bit more out there for some people, a little bit less easeful to slip into kind of thing. But that's where the growth really begins. And so we work with them in that way. And then in the mastery part, we just kind of come back and we begin to really deepen our understanding of them and our appreciation of them and how they show up and affect our life. So over the 24 weeks of the course, or sorry, 21 weeks with the India cohort, by the end of that journey, you may not be in any way feeling mastery in each of those practices, but they will have significantly reshaped your life experience and the way that you show up working with other people. I know it was a long answer, Crystal, but I hope that helped a bit.
You went through all the 9 practices. They won't sign up for the course. So thank you for stopping it.
Yeah. And the third practice is, yeah.
So just checking in if there's anything else anyone would like to share or ask, something that we've covered or something that's been on your mind. You noticed Anju and Naina are also here, so welcome. And anything that you'd like to jump in and ask or share, and feel free.
There's a question in the chat. I just saw Rahul put a question in there.
Yeah, it's just Crystal saying thank you. Oh, Rahul's question. Coming to the corporate world piece of it.
Yeah.
And we have a couple of those questions from, the questions that came in also earlier. So how do you feel well enough to ask your question? Then I'll just wait for you to unmute. You don't need to put your camera on, but you can just unmute and ask, and then I'll follow it up with some other questions.
Sure, Amrita. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, apologies for this. Just been too unwell over the last few days. But happy to be joining in for this session. So my question is that what I mentioned in the chat, the corporate world is so outcomes driven, and when one gets engaged for coaching assignments for leaders who are working in that world, it is outcomes driven, it is goals driven, and also many a time there is a disconnect with spirituality as such. So not many people may have really gone down the path of the spiritual aspect of life. So bringing in a coaching approach which is based on spirituality, how does one really make it work out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, so let me think on this for a minute, because there's a few different kind of ways I can speak to this. So the first thought that comes to my mind, Rahul, is that, and this is an important understanding, is that there is no such thing as, just the right way to coach. Like deep coaching is not like the right way. Deep coaching is a response to a certain readiness for a certain type of coaching. So I've got a thing I call the coaching continuum. And I mentioned earlier the idea of this transactional world, and on the other end, let's call it the transformational world, and at the very far end, the deep coaching world. And people who come for coaching show up all along that continuum. Some show up with a readiness for transformational work. Some show up with a readiness for the deepest of the deep work. And other people show up as you said, like in the corporate world is a great example. People show up with a readiness for, nailing the goals that they've set for themselves. Great. There's no right or wrong in this. This is the continuum of life. This is how people show up. And what I love about the coaching world is that there's a coaching approach that meets every single kind of person where they're at. And that is really the golden rule of coaching, isn't it? Meet a person where they're at. So we would never impose deep coaching. You would never bring that as your thing if the context in which you're working has no desire for it. That would make no sense, right? You want to bring the tool, if you will, that suits your context. Okay, so that's that piece. Deep coaching is a response to a recognition of a readiness for that form of coaching. It's not an imposition. So here's one of the challenges, though, Rahul, is that when people go through the deep coaching course, they fall in love with the work because it is an extraordinarily magical place to spend time with people. I mean, I can't even describe it to you here. The places that you will go with human beings in those spaces, it is truly the most unifying, soul-enlivening, expansive work I have ever encountered. And when you meet people who are ready for that, you're going to want to go there with them. The work changes you, though. Here's the thing. The work will change you. People go through the course. They love the work. They want to do the work. Some of them will begin to impose it upon others, and there's always going to be a problem when they do. So I say, just let this work change you from the inside out. So the way that you can bring this work into the corporate world is not through the method, if you will. It's through how you show up in the coaching space. This work will change the way that you sit with other human beings. It changes the way that you listen. It changes the way that you engage. It changes your entire presence. It changes everything just about you. And here's what will happen, Rahul. This is where things get really, really interesting. Because I've worked myself for years too with people who are much more, in a sense, ready for the transformational, for the transactional experience. Like they just want that form of coaching. But what happens is when they sit with me, over time, as that relationship builds, and it's partly because of the way I listen, maybe just the way I question, maybe it's what I reflect back. Maybe it's the anecdotes that I bring to it. It can be all of that. They will suddenly say to me at the end of a session, my God, we went so deep. How come every time, Rahul, I talk to you, I share things with you I've never shared with anybody else? How come, Rahul, when I talk to you, I feel like I can just trust you with my life? Like, not just the work but how come? And you're going to sit there with a little, twinkle in your eye, and a little smile on your face. And you won't necessarily say, I had this training but you'll just sit there and appreciate that moment that basically that person is saying to you, there's something about you that allows me to feel so safe in your presence that I'm willing to open my life to you. And you haven't had to do anything different. You could still be doing a more transactional approach. But there's going to be something in the way that you simply are being with people. You will not have that driving, forcing style. That'll soften on the edges. It doesn't mean you can't make things happen, but there's going to be a softening of that. You are going to drop your pretenses. You're going to drop your personas. I had this one coach that was working with me. He said, whenever I go into corporates, he says, I put on my persona of the professional coach. Now, the professional coach persona, he said, has all the answers. He's got the methodology. He's got the school's tools and techniques. He's been well trained. He's got the certificates on his wall. He's got everything he needs. I put that persona on because I know that's going to sell coaching. And I know that that's what my clients want to see. But he said, but here's the truth. He says, inside, I'm actually not that sure. Inside, I keep thinking maybe they're going to see me as false, fake. Maybe they'll see me as the pretender. So I just make sure that that persona becomes even more amplified so that nobody can see that I am showing up as, this when inside I feel that. What happens if all that falls away, Rahul? What happens if all of that, if that shows up in you, falls away and you show up in this corporate space, right? Meeting people right where they're at, helping them move in ways that they want to move. But your whole paradigm of engagement with them is shifted because of the work that you've done. So for me, this is the beauty of deep coaching, is that it changes us. And what happens also now you've got the ability to coach the entire spectrum, the entire continuum. You can coach the most transactional, and you can also meet people at the deepest of the deep. Whereas most coaches who haven't had that training on the deepest of the deep, they're only going to go to the point where they feel comfortable. And then beyond that, they don't know what to do. And usually that ends up in a kind of the middle of the continuum where they start to maybe talk a little bit about beliefs and values at a core level, checking out core motivations. But, once this stuff starts to come up, that's a bit sticky and dark and shadowy, those parts of ourselves that really they don't know what to do with it. It's like, so then they run back to just solving problems and making things happen and fixing things. And that's the place I'm comfortable, helping you achieve your objectives. But we won't go too deep. We won't really look at the core, we'll go back to that. So if you have this ability, you can coach the entire continuum. And it will show. Yeah. Amrita, I'm sure you'd like to add to this because you do this work in corporates. So yeah. What's your experience been?
My experience really has been about it being my conviction. Talking about transformation, there's every single organization that I've ever met, everyone wants, can you come and do some transformational work? And everybody says yes. And when I share what I mean by transformation, there's some who say yes, and there's some who say no. And that's that readiness piece. And so my experience has been to be able to speak to it and to be able to show up to it from that essence, and be very willing and lovingly willing to walk away from there where there is no readiness for it. And I think that builds greater conviction, because I'll just, excuse me, share one example of an organization that I met with maybe two years ago, and that I'm now beginning to work with, who came to me for transformational work. And at that point, they were not ready. And I said, this is the work that we do, and this is how, it works. And this is what I'm inviting you into. And they loved it, but they never came back to me. And we continued to stay in touch on and off, but nothing went from there. And now when they've come back to that space to say that this is the kind of work that we want to do, and I went back and shared it again, and they had their leaders who are ready for this choose to come and work in this space. And that's, I think that's that dance. And that's the dance that comes from that conviction that you bring, and continuing, for me, it is continuing to do the work for myself so that my presence continues to invite people in who are ready. And it's beautiful when that meeting happens. It's just so joyful.
Thanks, Leon. Thanks, Amrita.
You're welcome, Rahul. And we've had this discussion several times, so I hope you have greater clarity on this now.
You're going to ask that question again and again,
yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a good question, because I know other people also share that same curiosity. And just to add to that one thing, I don't mention spirituality with anybody ever, until they mention it first, right? So again, it's a response to, not an imposition of. Yeah. So you don't have to worry about how do they react to this spiritual view. It's like you don't ever have to mention that ever until they do, and then you respond.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Leon, I'm just going to, invite you to share. I mean, you've been here now and we've been working together for 5 years. And this is a question really to see that what has been your India experience? How do you feel that we within India have received this work and taken it forth? And if you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah. Well, you absolutely know I love love going to India, working with Indian people. I mean, it's always such a joy. The thing I love about Indian people is that they bring these two parts of the self. They bring this incredible intellect that wants to understand, right? That really wants to understand on an intellectual level. And then they've got this spiritual side that for some is based on, let's say, childhood and religion, but for many is also because there's something in it that's really calling to them, and they've embarked on this kind of journey within themselves in different ways. And it can show up in so many different flavors and forms in India. And that's what I love, is that they bring this to the table. And now that doesn't mean that they're perfected human beings by any stretch. It doesn't mean that their shell of ego is somehow softer than in other parts of the world. It's not. It's not. But when I work with them, what I love is just the keenness to understand, the keenness to grasp not only life, but the concepts, the keenness to know how to apply them in certain ways. Like all of that is very there. Since I lived in Taiwan, I'll give you just a little anecdote. Like if when I lived in Taiwan, now this is the Chinese culture, and if I go to a group there, say university or corporate, and I talk about something, and then I say, "Are there any questions?" There's like crickets in the room, right? The Chinese student is raised to not ask questions, not to speak to the teacher out of curiosity, just to head down, answer it. And they carry this often into adulthood because it's really hard to outwork if you've been that's been instilled in you since childhood. Just crickets, any questions? And when I went to India, my first time in India was 2012. And I was in Bangalore giving a talk. And there was this auditorium half full of people. And I had this 1.5 hour presentation. I presented one model for 10 minutes, just one model for 10 minutes. And the next hour was solid questions, right? I never even got near the latter part of my presentation. That's what I mean. It was just like everyone was thinking about it. They wanted to ask about it. They wanted to talk about it. Their hands were raising. And I've always just loved that level of engagement with students, right? Because for me as an instructor, it creates a real, I don't know, it's just a response to a passion, to a care, to an interest. Of course, that's just delightful to be a part of. So that's been my experience, but it doesn't mean that the work for Indians is somehow easier than for everyone else. It's still the work of coming to know yourself at a core essential level. It's still the work of confronting the ego and all its sticky parts and shadowy parts. People in India too have suffered abuse as children. They've suffered in all kinds of ways as well. And that still has to be looked at. It still has to be open to. And it doesn't mean that's no different than anywhere in the world, right? That's still there for them. Yeah. But that's been my experience, and I can't wait to return again.
Yeah. Thank you. And I somehow knew bits of that answer, but just hearing it all over again just lights me up as well, just to see the joy that you receive from being here.
Yeah.
But let's just see whether that piece around Indians still continues to hold true here, and since the majority are here, and see if there are any more questions that anyone has here that you want to come in and ask or share. Please, go ahead.
Nidhi, come in.
Hi. The question I had for you was, how do you really let go to come into this space? Because when you're working in corporates, one of my colleagues here said, you are in a totally different space. And for you to be your true self and to be in that authentic space of, higher consciousness, how do you really manage to be there all the time is something that I'm trying to discover, because it's so tough. It's so difficult to, one is transactional and another is just the opposite. So just wanted to understand from you, based on your experiences and also having trained in the corporate world, how did you navigate through that? How did you let go?
Well, when I did most of my work in the corporate world, I was still in the midst of what I would call my transformational journey, very much in the midst of it. And being in the midst of it, I absolutely did not have the skill, resourcefulness, resilience to stay deeply grounded in that, for me, optimal space, that optimal state of being. And so I struggled with that. I struggled with that immensely, right? And I would run into people who, whose energy patterns, whose way of thinking and being in this world ran so counter to what I was even trying to experience for myself that I would notice resistance towards them. I would notice myself not wanting to be in the same room as those people, or I would notice myself taking on certain kind of nervous energies being around them. I didn't have what it took to really navigate well. That's because I was in the midst of this journey for myself. I hadn't yet come to, I don't want to say there's a completion, because that's not really it. It's not that we somehow end up in this place called transformed, unless we're some kind of nirvana, enlightened Buddha kind of state, but I've never been there. It's more, there comes a point where you're going to feel like you've really landed in kind of into yourself. Now, this could be a long time coming. This could be 5, 10, 15-year journey. It's not unheard of for people to really go on these journeys for very long arcs of time. Yeah. But when you finally come into that place where you're really deeply grounded in kind of your essence and your essence work in this world, it becomes unshakable. And today I can go into organizations and none of it impacts me. I just observe it. And I just kind of sit, well, how do I want to engage with this, right? This is all, I remember this stuff. I remember that way of being. I remember those ways of patterns. I remember all of that. But there's a lightness in me and engagement with it. I don't take it so seriously. I don't feel heavy around it. But that's only because I did the work for decades, right? To get to the point where I could return in that way. So here's what's very interesting is I don't know if in my book, I write a model called The 6 Stages of Power by Janet Hagberg. And she wrote this really good book called Real Power. Personal power in organizations and how it shows up. And so she notices that there's different people at different stages of personal power can show up in an organization. There could be conflict. So let's call one sort of a more competitive state of power and one more, let's say, a more wise state of power. Now, an organization steeped in kind of that competitiveness, that striving for making things happen, cannot really see the value in the wisdom power. In fact, they don't really know what good they do, what use are they to the organization, so they'll often attack them. And then because of that attack happening, these people can't really stay. They don't want to stay in an environment that they're not supported. They don't see, their values not seen, so they leave. And then they try to work with organizations from the outside, become the consultant who comes back in. They can sort of stand in their own power and their own principle in that way, because now they're seen as the consultant that we paid for. But they're going to show up in organizations where they're valued and desired and wanted, as opposed to an organization where they're not. So that journey between that one kind of self and that other kind of self is where you're going to want to go for yourself. And that's the arc of your own kind of self-discovery till you come to the point where you are so grounded in who you are that it's unwavering, right? And you're going to go into organizations with a big smile on your face, knowing that it is as it is, and that you can be with all these people in all of their sort of states without it impacting you personally, right?
Sure.
But in the meantime, you may struggle. And it sounds like you might be experiencing some of that struggle now.
Yeah, totally
right?
relate to it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it could be that we're struggling in our personal lives too, in the same way, in our families. Our families are also kind of organization that we show up in one way and they show up in another. And that can be a kind of conflict too, right? Families steeped in powerless, families steeped in victimhood, families steeped in blame, families steeped in shame. These families exist. And so that same kind of thing happens when we try to kind of grow out of that. How do I show up in this place that keeps pulling me down, kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think good time to invite Raja in to share your comments and see where that takes us.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. I was really enjoying, all the conversation that was happening. Maybe one fundamental reason is that I'm 100% completely with what you're talking about, Leon. We had our conversation a long time before, if you remember.
I do.
Absolutely delight for me to sit and listen to the whole thing, and it's almost like your own voice, your own mind, your own kind of soul is kind of talking again. In fact, for every one of these questions, probably the answers would have been similar. So the temptation for me is, therefore, like I said right in the beginning, of wanting to share. And I know the challenge for me is to be making it crisp and meaningful within a context of time. Okay, so I suffer from this problem of over enthusiasm. Okay, and my wife nicknames me as Jada, which means more of everything. Okay, yeah. So I'll talk about it. I think I'll address and share completely the conviction about the challenge that not just the corporate world, normally the world brings for us, which is we are so much conditioned by the objective reality. We're so much conditioned by the world of corporates, which means the world of competition, the world of competence. How do we bring in, a sense and purpose about the other? I think the other is the first recognition that we need to have. And the moment I say the other, I realize that unless we accept the fundamental principle of duality existing and recognize the need for moving away from that one singularity that we are preoccupied with to the other element, which is so beautifully existing all the time. What we are very used to is the objective reality, what is outside us, what can be evaluated, what can be measured, what can be weighed. And I think what we don't choose to do is, me as the observer is the constant factor. So do I go in and become self-aware, which we don't choose to? So I think that is the fundamental thing that it begins with. If I can start making efforts to, start moving into looking at this other reality, which is the subjective reality, which is all the time looking at the objective reality. Look at this paradox, as Rahul rightly said, the corporate world, it's so much outcome driven. And the biggest parody is, and the outcome is determined by the income that you have. First duality, such a funny world this is. And, which is economic results. And those economic results are achieved by objectives. Objectives are measured by evaluation. And to evaluate something, you need to be away from it, because you can't evaluate otherwise, because evaluation requires being able to distance yourself from the other. And therefore, this whole idea is to separate yourself from the other and, in pursuit of the objective reality, being able to pursue whatever. And here comes the other thing, saying that, so who is this observer? I think that is the one beautiful question. Who is this person who is making himself separate from the objective reality and observing? Can the observer start observing himself or herself? Or can the observer observe the self? That's the beauty of this, the whole thing that Leon is talking about. Awesome. So instead of income, all that Leon is saying is, come in. That's it.
That's it. Yeah. Yes, come in. Join me in this.
Going in is, can you be reflective? Which means, can you be observing? An observation about what? About yourself, which means for the first time, can you break the distance between you and all your identities? I'm Raja? No, that's the name, label given to me. I'm a consultant? No, that is the profession that I have. I'm a man? No, that is the sexuality that I have. I'm a human being? Hey, that is the product of creation that I am. So who's the real I? So if I really get into this, that becomes engagement, because I'm taking away all the labels and the boundaries which are defining me and my identities. I'm integrating, first of all, me with my own self, which means I'm really discovering the beauty of my being. So whereas the corporate world wants you to be successful, self-awareness wants you to be fulfilled. The corporate world wants you to be successful, full of success, whereas the inward journey wants you to be full with your feeling, fulfilled. It's not about playing with words, really. It's that difference between the pursuit and the possibility of becoming versus the immensity and the discovery of being. I've been working as a consultant now for 38 years in the corporate world. Day before yesterday, I delivered a talk in IIT Madras, and the director was there. And luckily, he came right at the point of time when I was beginning the talk. And the topic was Beyond Algorithms, the Heart in Leadership. It was a 45-minute talk that I delivered. And when the director came over, he said, I wish I can make every student of mine in IIT listen to Raja Krishnamurti. Because all that I did, Leon, was nothing different from what you've been talking about, saying, hey, can we recognize this immensity within us, which will actually make us such a different kind of an entity by the journey inwards. I'm kind of wanting to close it right here because this can go on for the next 1 hour. The beauty I'm saying is, if this opportunity is realized, that we need to clarify this agenda. So I would say both to Nidhi and Rahul, yes, the challenge comes in terms of clarifying to the corporate clients about the immensity and the power of this. Touchwood, I would say in the last 20, 25 years, repeatedly, I've been able to go through this, what, Amrita also was talking about. Yes, they have this doubt. They have this whole question of, can you tell me exactly how we can measure the effectiveness of your program? And my answer to them is, we can do that exactly. You begin with giving me the data based on your measure about what were the things that you measured in your organization. I'll come back with the countermeasure. And then they start smiling. I'm saying, that's it. If you have in your way a technique of measuring what you're wanting to be assessed, I'm all with you, and I'll give you match to match, point to point, a measure of the effectiveness of this. So it's not about debating capability, Rahul and Nidhi. I think this journey demands a shift of a different kind, a struggle of a different kind. It's not easy, but it's beautiful. And I can't tell you in words what it means in life. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Raja. That's quite interesting and very profound. So in the chat, I've mentioned that this is full of paradoxes rather, because we all engage with the external world through those labels. The moment we take those labels away, it would be so very difficult to, to find a reason for that engagement itself. Like you said, I'm a consultant, I am this, I'm that. We are our roles. The moment we take those roles away, then who are we?
That's the question. That's the question.
Rahul, just now you used a word. Now, that's one word. You're given the answer yourself, Rahul. Hold on. Leon, I'll take a few minutes more. Rahul has given a beautiful answer by himself. Rahul, hold on. Apne bhi use kiya. You used the word engagement. Rahul, have you thought about this word engagement deeply? Can you tell me what it means? Why do we ever say between a girl and a boy before marriage, engagement takes place? Why do we say that a gear is engaged in a vehicle? Have you thought about it? I'll give you the answer. Okay. There is this individual identity with the boundaries. He's a man or he's a boy with a male identity. Here is a girl, a female with a gender identity. The moment we are willing to take away the identity, which are the borders and those boundaries, and say, hey, from today, they are together, a couple, they are licensed to be together. When we take away boundaries, engagement takes place. When that particular rod is put into that bracket, And therefore, a gear operates, we say it's an engagement of the gear. The distance between that piece of metal and that piece of hold, when it is taken away, when the distance is taken away, it's engagement. When the distance between your identities and yourself is taken away, that's beautiful engagement, Rahul.
It takes a lifetime, Raja, and maybe that even that is not enough.
Hota hai, pura. I agree with you. It happens continuously, but it's a beautiful journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
Rahul,
you.
and thank you, Raja and Rahul. I just am tempted to jump in and say that distance is just from here to here, and that's really the journey, and that's really the question that we invite uh, you into. So do
Yeah,
come in.
absolutely.
Yeah, Leon, I'll just hand it back. And is there anyone else who wants to share anything else or ask anything else that comes up? Yeah, Sandeep, come on in.
Yes, I would not like to add as such in a sense that give a reflection or so. But all that I wanted to say is, that I would like to reflect by saying that my journey in common language is around 23 years of Indian Air Force, 11 years with a corporate, and last couple of years as purpose and leadership coach, ICF-PCC, around 600 hours of coaching experience. A lot more to learn and discover. What brought me here in this course, I have heard Leon some time back, and since then it was in my mind, is the quest around, there's a puzzle it looks, if I may say that, is there are elements like purpose, values, principle with mind, emotion, ego. I have heard them, many of them here also. Awareness, spirituality, ontological approach, transformation. And then Leon talked about rhythm. Now, this is where the dilemma comes within me because I am more or less a man of routine, and there is a struggle within from for movement from routine to rhythm because I think that, in a sense, gives me a understanding of discipline and motivation. And finally, it's a question around balance and integration around conventional coaching. If you say, if I use that word conventional, I say is conventional. If I say that approach and the deep coaching. So what I'm looking for in this session, and I don't want the answer here because I'm sure I don't want to spoil the spirit of the entire exercise that we are going to start in January is I'll be looking for this balance to find out because I'm sure they both stand very strong in their own fundamental understanding. And somewhere we need to find out what to balance and what to integrate. I, as a coach, would need to find out that, and that would be my quest because there's no doubt in my mind they both stand in their own place and both might be very profound approach. Leon covered it up saying it is all about space, time, and context. He might have not used this word, but tried. What I have understood is he's trying to talk about that. So, how do I mix this routine and rhythm, and balance and integration would be my entire my approach to this course when I get into, unless both of you, Leon and Amrita, influence me to think another way around. That's it.
We're gonna work some voodoo. Yeah, beautiful. So much is going to happen for you in that course, Sandeep. So
Yes,
much.
yes,
So much. Yeah.
I'm sure.
So we begin to wrap up today's session and engaging conversation. Just any last thoughts or comments, and invite Leon to share to help us close. Checking, or is that your comment? Checking whether it's coming
Nope,
on?
I'm good. I'm just saying this is good. This is good. Thumbs
Good.
up.
Yeah. All right then. seems a good place to bring it to a close. Thank you all for being here, and I do hope when you find the readiness, you will join us on this journey, which is a journey of a lifetime that just begins with one step. But
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day ahead, everyone. Carry this forth.
Thank you. Same to you.
May our paths cross again. Until next time, thank you, Amrita.
Thanks, Leon.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye all.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.